The restaurant manager looked down at the man in the wheelchair with disgust. "I'm sorry, but we can't accommodate your situation," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a fine dining establishment, not a charity." The other diners chuckled nervously, some recording on their phones. But what they didn't know was that the broken man they were mocking had single-handedly saved an entire platoon in Afghanistan. And his former commanding officer, now a decorated colonel, was about to walk through those doors with one simple mission: to remind everyone what real honor looks like. His name was Marcus Thompson. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, though he rarely used his rank anymore. That rainy Thursday evening, he wasn't looking for special treatment or seeking attention. He simply wanted to celebrate his daughter's acceptance to medical school at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where his late wife had always dreamed of dining. Marcus maneuvered his wheelchair through the restaurant's heavy glass doors, the rain still glistening on his Army veteran cap. His prosthetic legs, hidden beneath pressed khakis, were the visible reminder of an IED blast in Kandahar that had claimed his mobility but never his spirit. In his jacket pocket, he carried a small velvet box containing his wife's engagement ring, the one he planned to pass down to his daughter that night. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly manicured nails, looked uncomfortable as he approached. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the wheelchair rather than his face. "Thompson, party of two," Marcus replied politely. "I called ahead about accessibility." The hostess frowned, flipping through her reservation book with exaggerated concern. "I don't see anything here about special accommodations." She called over the manager, a thin man in his 40s named Derek, whose expensive suit couldn't hide his cheap attitude. Derek approached with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "This is a fine dining establishment, not a charity. We can't have wheelchairs blocking the aisles. It's a fire hazard." Other diners began to stare. Some lowered their phones to record what they assumed would be entertainment. Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment, the same looks he'd received countless times since returning home. "I called yesterday," Marcus said calmly. "I was told you could accommodate wheelchairs." Derek shrugged dismissively. "Well, whoever told you that was wrong. Maybe try the McDonald's down the street. They're more suited to your situation." A few customers snickered. Marcus's daughter, Sarah, finally arrived, rushing through the rain. She was still in her hospital scrubs from her shift as a nurse, her face bright with excitement about sharing her medical school news. "Dad? Sorry I'm late. The ER was crazy." She stopped mid-sentence, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Derek turned his condescending smile toward Sarah. "I was just explaining to your father that we can't accommodate his condition. Perhaps you could find somewhere more appropriate for family dining." Sarah's face flushed with anger, but Marcus placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll find somewhere else." But as they turned to leave, Sarah noticed something that made her blood boil. At a corner table sat an elderly man in a motorized wheelchair, dining comfortably with his family. She pointed him out to Derek. "What about him?" Derek followed her gaze, and his face went pale. That's different. Mr. Castellano is a valued regular customer." "Different how?" Sarah demanded. Derek leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Look, between you and me, your father's chair looks military, medical. It makes other guests uncomfortable. Mr. Castellano's is just age-related, more acceptable." The nearby diners who had been recording suddenly looked less amused. A woman at the adjacent table, Dr. Patricia Williams, a trauma surgeon who recognized Marcus from the VA hospital, stood up from her meal. "That man," she said loudly enough for the entire section to hear, "is a decorated combat veteran. I've seen his medical files. Do you know what more acceptable means to someone who lost his legs saving other soldiers?" Derek waved her off dismissively. "Ma'am, please don't cause a scene. This is a business decision, not personal." Dr. Williams pulled out her phone, not to record, but to make a call. "Colonel? It's Patricia Williams. You need to get to Romano's on 5th Street. They just refused service to Marcus Thompson." 3 blocks away, Colonel James Patterson was finishing a late dinner with his wife when he received the call. Upon hearing Marcus's name, He stood so abruptly that he knocked over his water glass. "Marcus Thompson?" he repeated, his voice carrying across the restaurant. His wife looked up in concern as his face hardened into the expression she recognized from his combat days. "Get the car," he told her quietly. "Right now." Back at Romano's, Marcus was slowly wheeling toward the exit, his daughter walking beside him with tears of frustration in her eyes. The other diners watched in uncomfortable silence, their phones now lowered. Derek stood smugly by the hostess station, checking his watch. "Finally," he muttered to the hostess. "I thought they'd never leave. These people always want to make everything about their problems." But just as Marcus reached the door, it burst open with a force that made the entire restaurant turn. Colonel James Patterson entered in full dress uniform, raindrops still clinging to his ribbons and medals. His presence filled the room like a storm front, and his eyes immediately found Marcus. The restaurant fell completely silent. Patterson strode directly to Marcus, came to attention, and rendered a crisp salute. "Sergeant Thompson," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. Marcus looked up in surprise, then slowly returned the salute. "Colonel Patterson? What are you doing here?" Patterson's voice remained at parade ground volume, ensuring that the man who saved 12 soldiers in Kandahar gets the respect he's earned. He turned slowly to face the room, his gaze settling on Derek like a targeting laser. "Who here refused service to this soldier?" Patterson asked, each word sharp as a blade. Derek tried to maintain his composure, but his voice cracked. "Sir, this is a private establishment. We have the right to refuse service to anyone." Patterson took 3 measured steps toward the manager. "Sergeant Marcus Thompson," he announced to the room, was awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart. He lost both legs below the knee when he threw himself on an IED to protect his squad. 12 soldiers went home to their families because of his sacrifice. The silence in the restaurant was now absolute. Phones that had been recording Marcus's humiliation were now capturing Derek's. Patterson continued, his voice never rising but somehow growing more powerful. He spent 2 years learning to walk again, not for himself, but so he could return to active duty. When the Army medically retired him, he became a counselor for other wounded veterans. This man has given more to his country than most people give to anything. Derek's face had gone from pale to gray. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Patterson cut him off, "because you saw a wheelchair and decided that was all you needed to know." He gestured to the other diners. Everyone here saw a disabled man and assumed he was less worthy of respect. "But let me tell you what I see." Patterson turned back to Marcus. "I see the soldier who stayed behind enemy lines for 6 hours, wounded and alone, calling in airstrikes on his own position to prevent an enemy advance. I see the man who refused medical evacuation until every one of his soldiers was accounted for. I see the father who worked 3 jobs from a hospital bed to pay for his daughter's nursing school." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as the restaurant patrons began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Dr. Williams approached Marcus's wheelchair. "Sergeant Thompson, I should have spoken up sooner. I see you at the VA hospital every week, volunteering with other wounded warriors. You've probably helped more people than everyone in this room combined." Patterson reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. "Marcus, this arrived at the base yesterday. Your promotion to Sergeant Major finally came through. The paperwork took 3 years because of your medical retirement, but it's official now." Marcus stared at the box containing his new stripes. "Sir, I'm retired. I can't accept a promotion." "You can and you will," Patterson said firmly, "because there are young soldiers who need to know that service doesn't end with injury. They need to see that honor isn't diminished by disability." The restaurant had become completely still. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness the scene. Patterson then turned to address Derek directly. "You refused service to one of America's finest soldiers because his wheelchair made your other customers uncomfortable. But I'm curious, how comfortable are you right now?" Derek couldn't meet his eyes. "Sir, if you had known what? That he was a war hero? That he'd sacrificed his body for his country?" Patterson's voice remained steady, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. The fact that you needed to know his service record to treat him with basic human dignity tells me everything about your character." An older gentleman at a nearby table stood up. "Colonel, sir? I'm Robert Chen, retired Navy. I was one of the people recording earlier. I thought, I'm ashamed of myself." Patterson nodded acknowledgement. "We all make mistakes, Mr. Chen. The question is what we do to correct them." The restaurant manager appeared from the kitchen, having heard the commotion. Unlike Derek, she immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. "Sergeant Major Thompson," she said, using his new rank, "on behalf of Romanos, I want to apologize. This is not who we are as a restaurant or as people." She turned to Derek. "You're fired. Clear out your office tonight." Derek started to protest, but she held up her hand. "This isn't just about tonight. It's about every person you've judged, every customer you've dismissed, every time you've confused your position with actual authority." Patterson reached out and shook Marcus's hand. "Sergeant Major, would you and Sarah do me the honor of joining my wife and me for dinner? We have a lot to catch up on." Marcus nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "I'd like that, sir. Sarah has some news to share. She got into medical school." Patterson's stern expression broke into a genuine smile. "Outstanding. We'll make this a proper celebration." As they moved to Patterson's table, something remarkable happened. Every veteran in the restaurant, and there were several, stood and saluted as Marcus passed. The civilians stood as well, not because they were told to, but because they finally understood they were in the presence of true heroism. The rest of the evening passed in warm conversation. Marcus shared stories of his recovery and his work with other veterans. Sarah talked about her dreams of becoming a trauma surgeon, inspired by the doctors who had saved her father's life. Patterson spoke of the soldiers Marcus had trained who were now leaders themselves. When the bill came, Patterson reached for his wallet, but the restaurant manager appeared at their table. "There's no charge tonight," she said. "And Sergeant Major Thompson, you and your family have a standing invitation to dine here anytime. We'll ensure you're always accommodated with the respect you deserve." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Williams approached their table one more time. "Sergeant Major, I hope you'll consider something. The VA hospital is starting a new program for newly wounded veterans. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands their journey. The pay isn't much, but—" Marcus smiled. "Doctor, I've never done anything for the pay. I'd be honored to help." 3 months later, Romanos held a fundraiser for wounded veterans, raising over $50,000 for adaptive equipment and counseling services. The event was Marcus's idea, turning his moment of humiliation into an opportunity to help others. Derek, meanwhile, found work at a fast food restaurant across town. His new manager, a young veteran named Carlos, made sure Derek understood that respect wasn't determined by rank, uniform, or ability. It was earned through character. Sarah graduated medical school 2 years later, specializing in trauma surgery with a focus on military casualties. At her graduation, she wore her father's original Army pin on her cap, and Marcus sat in the front row, his new sergeant major stripes visible on his dress uniform. The local newspaper eventually picked up the story, not through Marcus, who remained humble about the incident, but through other diners who had witnessed the evening's events. When contacted for comment, Marcus simply said, "I hope people learned what I've always known, that a person's worth isn't measured by what they've lost, but by what they choose to do with what they have left." Colonel Patterson, now General Patterson, established the Marcus Thompson Center for Adaptive Leadership at the military base, where wounded veterans learn to transition from military to civilian careers. The center's motto, engraved above the entrance, reads, "Strength is not the absence of struggle, it's the courage to continue despite it." Romano's restaurant still displays a plaque by the entrance honoring all veterans, but employees know the real story behind it. They remember the night when assumptions nearly cost them their humanity, when a man who asked for nothing but basic respect reminded them all what true service looks like. Marcus continues to counsel wounded veterans, helping them navigate not just their physical challenges, but the emotional ones, including the prejudice and misunderstanding they sometimes face from others. His wheelchair remains a symbol not of limitation, but of resilience. On quiet Thursday evenings, when the light hits the restaurant's memorial plaque just right, staff members remember that dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you're born with. They remember that true strength sometimes comes in unexpected packages, and that the most important battles are often fought not on foreign soil, but in the everyday moments when we choose compassion over judgment. And in a medical school 2 states away, a young trauma surgeon begins her residency, carrying forward the quiet courage and unwavering integrity that defines not just good soldiers, but good people. She keeps her father's challenge coin in her pocket, smoothed by years of his handling, as a reminder that some wounds heal stronger than they were before they were broken. The story lives on, not in social media posts or viral videos, but in the way people treat each other. One interaction, one moment of choice between judgment and understanding, at a time. Because some lessons are too important to be learned only once, and some honor is too valuable to be forgotten. Marcus Thompson never sought to be remembered as a hero. He simply wanted to take his daughter to dinner and celebrate her achievements. But in that moment of discrimination, he reminded everyone who witnessed it what true service looks like, not in the medals worn or the battles won, but in the quiet dignity of continuing to serve others, even when others fail to serve you. The ring in his pocket, the one he gave to Sarah that night, now sits on her finger as she saves lives in the emergency room. And every time she looks at it, she remembers that some promises are kept not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of refusing to let others' limitations define your worth. In the end, that's what made Marcus Thompson more than just a veteran, more than just a survivor. It made him a man worth saluting, a father worth celebrating, and a reminder that true strength isn't measured by what we can do with our bodies, but by what we choose to do with our hearts.